So, the UK Prime Minister, Alexander Boris de Pfeffel Johnson, has commanded an 80-seat majority in the House of Commons since December 12, 2019, and as post-Brexit Britain begins to emerge from the rubble of COVID-19, you might legitimately ask the question, what happens next? And truth be told, I haven't a Scooby, but I can say what should happen next, which really ought to be enough. After all, I voted for Boris, and I don't know how things operate in your country, but here in England, that makes me his boss. Let me explain. In a free, liberal democracy, supreme power and authority belongs to the individual. That's me. And in my infinite wisdom, I realise I can't achieve everything I'd like all by me onesie, savvy? I've got work to do, places to go, people to see. The Queen's Gambit to finish on Netflix. I'm busy, alright? Therefore, I imbue Mr. Johnson with the power to accomplish tasks on my behalf. Look, have you read Lord of the Rings? Well, there's a war on in that between good and evil, right? And evil's winning. Yeah, there's more of them, and they've got giant spiders and fucking super goths. So, God, essentially, makes two wizards in his image and sends them to Earth to level the playing field and give good a fighting chance. I'm very much God in this analogy, and Boris is my wizard, and if he completes his mission and represents me well, he will be rewarded with safe passage into the land of Enya, or wherever it is that they go. But if he deceives me, goes rogue, or starts acting beyond the remit, there will be consequences, okay? I'll take that staff he carries and ram it up his jacksie. So, with that lovely image in mind, let's take a look at 7 simple domestic policies Boris must pursue in 2021 to build back better and keep the gods happy. Ready?
For Frodo.
The doubters, the doomsters, the gloomsters, they are going to get it wrong again. The people who bet against Britain are going to lose their shirts because we're going to restore trust in our democracy.
First things first, you've got to pass a Free Speech Act. Okay? Britons require clear, blanket, statutory protection from government interference for all expression that does not constitute direct incitement, defamation, or perjury, period. I'm fed up with reading about 19-year-old girls fined for posting rap lyrics to their Instagram accounts, or Scottish comedians convicted of teaching their pets to raise a paw. We have babyish laws that criminalise elastic concepts like hate and offence, along with entire police divisions now patrolling the internet in hunt of heretics to harass with sinister phone calls and workplace visits. Take as our model the First Amendment of the US Bill of Rights and make the effects as permanent and inviolable as Constitutional Convention allows. The Free Speech Act must expressly repeal any and all sections of the Human Rights Act, the Communications Act, and the new Policing Bill, which limit speech, and contain a separate clause confirming that there is no right not to be offended on these islands. We already have precedent at common law for this. In a High Court ruling last year, Justice Warby stressed that free speech encompasses the right to offend and indeed to abuse another, while Lord Justice Sedley ruled back in 1997 for goodness sake, that freedom to only speak inoffensively is not worth having. Watching the British people discard their liberties with such indifference throughout this pandemic has been truly chilling. And if freedom remains a value in our culture, as is the perpetual mantra, you must prove it. You must encourage a national conversation on the very issue, and what better way to start than by protecting that conversation and all others in law. Draft the bill, pass the bill, and in doing so, by the way, make it clear to our shortbread-sucking cousins north of Hadrian's Wall that these provisions protect them too. The Supreme Court of the United Kingdom will have final say on all matters related to human rights, and if Hamza Yusuf and his band of SNP sycophants don't like it, good luck securing better terms from Brussels.
The principal reason that our kingdom is a great nation can be encompassed in one word: freedom. Freedom of action, freedom of assembly, freedom of thought, freedom of belief, freedom of speech, freedom under the law. And of all these freedoms, the most precious is freedom of speech. It's been fundamental to the development of our culture, our society, our literature, our science, and our economy. Indeed, our national wealth today owes more to the free exchange of ideas than to the exchange of goods. Freedom of speech is fundamental to everything we have, everything we are, and everything we stand for.
There's got to be at least 18 reasons to scrap the BBC licence fee. I'm going to give you 3, okay? First, the BBC is a wolf in sheep's clothing. Despite sailing under the banner of impartiality, upon which its monopoly was classically justified, the organisation is patently biased, and biased towards the Blairite New Labour breed of politics. Now, you may favour that breed of politics, and that's your privilege, but why everybody else should be forced to pay for its upkeep and good health is beyond me. From Brexit to Covid to the culture wars, the BBC has a point of view which it promotes, and alternative insights are ridiculed, diminished, or ignored entirely. A national broadcaster which does not adequately reflect the breadth of British opinion has no right to access the breadth of the British tax base. Second, and almost to add insult to injury, the BBC remains relevant, predominantly for people with political views it spends most of its time deriding, namely the elderly. Millennials like myself couldn't give a tinker's toss about the BBC, and younger generations have never even heard of television. Clinging to a licence fee model in an age of Netflix and YouTube is indefensible. You're forcing many to pay for a service they seldom use at an annual rate of £157.50, an exorbitant tax that BBC honchos are presumably spending on cocaine as opposed to programming, because I'll tell you this, if it wasn't made by Mark Gatiss or David Attenborough, it's gonna be shit. And finally, there is public support for this. Some polls indicate 2/3 of us want the licence fee abolished, and this halfway house, by the way, the Tories have proposed in the past to decriminalise non-payment, is weak sauce. In that event, the regime of forced purchase would remain, only now the BBC will be able to sue you for non-payment in a civil court where the standard of proof is lower. Just privatise the damn thing, Boris. They needn't worry, okay? Capitalism's all about the customer. And surely, with such stellar scheduling, the customer will stick around.
This is what your money is paying for the BBC. Right, here we go. Homes under the hammer. Repeat. A1, Britain's longest road. I mean, would you? Who gives a flying? If I'd put that idea forward at the Sun... Tell you what, Rupert. Yeah, what's that? Let's do a documentary series on Britain's longest road. Yeah? Well, why don't you get on it and not come back? Go to the end of it and give us a call. Caught red-handed. Don't even know what it is. Repeat. Bargain hunt. Repeat. Is that still going? News at 1. They can't repeat that. Doctors. Impossible. Repeat. Escape to the country. Repeat. Garden rescue. Repeat. Flog it. Repeat. Pointless is repeated. That can't be right. News at 6. Well, they can't change this. There we go. And then EastEnders. Right, let's go. So that's got through. I will come back to you. Oh, this is a belter, Diana. Thank you for this. Here we go. BBC Two. Politics Live. Well, obviously that's fresh. The Super League show. Is that rugby? I don't know. Going Back, Giving Back. What the hell's that all about? Repeat. The TV that made me. The TV that made me. The TV that made me. The TV that... I don't even know how to read it. The TV that made me. The TV that made me. The TV that made me. Whatever the hell it is. Anyway, it's on at 2:35 if you're that interested. I'd be listening to LBC, are you? And this is sensational. Here we go. BBC Two, big one, The Titfield Thunderbolt, which is a film from 1953. And they're charging pensioners to watch this cobblers.
Next, Boris should cut corporation tax to 15%. It currently stands at 19%, and Chancellor Sunak's desire to raise the rate to 25% will slide us into the moderately fucked category, I'd say. Look, all things being equal, the lower your tax rates, the more investment you attract. Which stands to reason. Both businesses and people want to be where they can control a greater fraction of their income. That is true at the best of times. Its truth cannot be overstated as we emerge from lockdown with the worst recession for 300 years and in dire need of economic growth. We must be competitive. Now, a corporation tax is not the only tool in the kit, by any means. A deregulation is vital, and I'm encouraged to see the introduction of the Financial Services Bill and the Free Ports Scheme. That is good, but doesn't change the reality that standard of living declines the more you fleece the private sector. It's no accident that the Republic of Ireland, for example, with a corporate tax rate of 12.5%, boasts a GDP per capita of $80,000. In the last decade, the Irish have become twice as rich as the Brits because the Taoiseach makes it financially attractive for conglomerates like Apple and Google to establish themselves. Boris could do the same by slashing capital gains, national insurance, and corporation tax. The ultimate irony here, of course, is that as we squeeze big business and they set sail for greener pastures or avoid Britain completely, Treasury takings will be lower. I mean, think about it. Is it better to have 100 companies pay you 25% of their profits, or 1,000 companies pay you 15%? And this is what each chancellor, since Nigel Lawson, has understood. Boris himself argued back in 2019, every time corporation tax has been cut in this country, it has produced more revenue. And unless he rediscovers that Thatcherism of yesteryear and paves the way for a dynamic business-led bounce back, forget Singapore on Thames. I mean, we'll be lucky to keep pace with the bloody Italians.
There's a number of things you can do that will encourage businesses to keep growing. Here's the thing. There's fiscal loosening that takes the form of spending, and there's fiscal loosening that takes the form of tax cuts and allowing people to spend more. Why does the second work better than the first? For the most basic and obvious of reasons. People will spend their money more wisely than a committee of bureaucrats will spend it for them, even if that committee is made up of the best and wisest and most disinterested people in the world, right? They are not superhuman, and they can't fail to have some unintended consequences and some errors at the margin. And so if there is a case for a one-off fiscal loosening in the aftermath of this quite extraordinary event, it should be in the direction of cutting taxes. And that will mean accepting the basic truth that the role of the politician is not to create jobs, is not to sustain jobs, it's to remove obstacles so that businesses can grow and hire more people. And that was why, following Margaret Thatcher, Britain had better structural employment than almost anywhere in Europe, precisely because we understood that the role of the government was to shift the rocks and to let the grass grow, to allow businesses to grow themselves. And it's depressing how rarely you hear anyone prepared to make that argument today.
So Boris has decided to make climate change a centerpiece of his political legacy, and there's nothing I can do about that. Okay? He's convinced, and look, that doesn't terrify me necessarily. I mean, he's obviously not a card-carrying member of the Thunberg cult, you know, the kind of alarmist who thinks if we don't all revert to cave dwelling by 2030, the Rite of Spring will start playing as Earth splits in pieces, akin to the final scenes of Disney's Fantasia. Nevertheless, the man's inability to focus on practical ways forward here, i.e. going nuclear, is a real problem. Now, it's true, his 10-point plan, I think, sets aside $500 million to invest in a few power plants, but wind turbines are the government's main focus, probably the least efficient energy source out there, and more importantly, the present barriers to nuclear innovation make it infeasible for entrepreneurs to enter the market and operate effectively. Nuclear power is the only technology that can provide the energy for future civilization on any real scale. And if you were serious about cutting carbon emissions or fueling some green industrial revolution, you'd be incentivizing development in that area. You wouldn't be forcing electric cars on everybody, Boris, which take more emissions to produce than their petrol equivalents anyway, or betting on impractical pumps that generate low-grade heat and freeze up during the winter months, for heaven's sake. He should hit the brakes on renewables. They're unreliable, require backup sources of energy, and in terms of power density, do little better than a hamster running on a sodding wheel. Instead, invest that money in R&D for nuclear fusion and replace the current regulatory system with one that is safe but encourages competition and enthusiasm within the private sector. Yes, there'll be howls and cries from vested interests and lobby groups who care more about raising the price of electricity for the little guy than actually improving the environment, but you're the PM, Boris, so start acting like it?
I think I've, in my own mind, identified that the problem is we can't make new nuclear. We can make the same nuclear over and over again, but that's going to get more and more expensive because we're always adding safety worries to it and saying, well, actually, we need to make it so that you can't have a 9/11 where an airplane runs into it. So we've got to make a stronger shell or something. So we're constantly adding to the cost by demanding more safety from an existing design. If we were able to say, instead of that, let's switch to making a different design that doesn't depend on water and therefore, needs to be pressurized. It uses molten salt instead, and then the fuel is also the coolant, and on paper these are beautiful designs. Why can't we switch to trying it's not, we're making nuclear power stations the way we made them in the 1950s. We're not making computers the way we made them in the 1950s. We've made whole transitions. And the answer seems to me to be because licensing a new design costs an enormous amount of money in nuclear and takes an enormously long time. And so when you do that, you don't set out with something that you don't know is going to work.
Many on the left now want to abolish university tuition fees. I want to abolish student loans. Hashtag not all. It is obscene to me that the government spends £17 billion a year, most of which is never repaid, on useless degrees that shouldn't even exist in the first place. Here are the subjects I'm prepared to take a punt on. Okay? Science, tech, engineering, math, medicine, law, and economics. That's it. If you have the passion and aptitude to pursue one of those fields, I'll cut you a check. Because A, you'll certainly find a job later that allows me to recoup my investment, and B, it'll be the kind of job that's economically productive and actually necessitates academic expertise. But look, if you want to study communications, fashion, sociology, or lesbian dance, either find a company stupid enough to supply a scholarship or pay for it yourself. There are far too many people wasting time at university these days, and graduates of that type end up earning less than those who had the nous to leave school at 16 and find meaningful work anyway. Now, you can't necessarily stop individuals making bad choices, but you can stop incentivizing bad choices and emptying public finances down the drain after them. Can you believe more than 50% of young Brits attend university? In Germany, that figure is closer to 30, which sounds altogether more reasonable. And abolishing government loans for certain subjects could lead to positive outcomes in other areas. Or do you think it's a coincidence that students of physics are generally less woke than students of advertising? For goodness sake. I mean, these people have nothing else to do. Of course they're going to turn to politics and start causing trouble. Engineers can't do that. If they spent half the time worrying about systemic racism, the fucking bridge would fall down. We can save money here and help loosen the grip of social justice over many of our best institutions. I mean, how much more of this do we honestly need?
My name is Sam Brazil, and I'm a public health and women's and gender studies major from Irmo, South Carolina. I chose both of those majors because I'm really interested in how structural factors affect different populations, and about how, in ways that I'm not aware of, then people different from me might have big disadvantages. And I write for the Daily Gamecock, our student newspaper, and women's and gender studies has really helped me think about gender. I write for the arts and culture section, so when I look at different works of art, I think about gender in ways that I wouldn't have before. And I've become a diversity peer educator since getting interested in these issues. And I really feel like it's going to affect my outlook in whatever I do, make me more aware of the experiences other people are having.
What should you do? So the guy there, one answer is far too many people go to university now. The people at universities who should not be there, they don't have the mental faculty to cope with it. And they should go into a useful profession and train for it, and everyone would be better off, and they'd have less debt, and we'd have more plumbers and everything else.
In a post-Brexit world, the UK is no longer bound by the European Court of Justice, but the European Court of Human Rights will continue to shape English law so long as we remain signatories to the Convention of 1953. Now, I'm not against human rights. I'm not even against crystallising human rights in statute, to the possible vexation of any common law fundamentalists. But the fact of the matter is, the ECHR accrues no benefits to Britain whatever. We had fundamental freedoms in this country long before the Council of Europe, thank you very much, and who would seriously claim Strasbourg has been a bulwark against the creeping authoritarianism of late. Did I mention Scotland's hate crime bill? And this leads to the fundamental point. The ECHR was never set up to defend natural-born rights in law, but as an instrument to advance lofty political aims. A cursory glance reveals wording of a willfully flabby nature, giving imaginative judges all the space in the solar system. Freedom of expression, for instance, is qualified by notions of public health and morals, while Article 8, covering the right to respect for private and family life, is often cited by immigration lawyers to prevent the expulsion of illegal aliens and foreign criminals. Priti Patel has been praised recently for her up-and-coming overhaul of the asylum system, but the truth is, our membership of the ECHR constrains her reforms to a remarkable degree. One last point. People might say, look, we've ignored the ECHR in the past, we'll do it again. You know, Strasbourg once told us you can't deny prisoners the vote, and we ignored that. They said last month you can't deport Slashy McRapist, and he's gone anyway. To which I'd simply say, A, non-compliance is very rare, okay, given that convention norms have been fully embraced by our parliament. We have the Human Rights Act of '98 to attest to that. And B, I believe Britain should be the sort of country that honours her international commitments, all right? I mean, if we say we're going to abide by these rules, it doesn't look great when we arbitrarily refuse to abide by these rules. Straightforward disengagement is both the practical and moral thing to do if we want to meet our domestic needs and remain consistent with our friends and partners on the world stage.
The case for Britain remaining a member of organisations such as NATO, the World Trade Organisation and the United Nations, for example, is clear. But as I have said before, the case for remaining a signatory of the European Convention on Human Rights, which means Britain is subject to the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights, is not clear. Because despite what people sometimes think, it wasn't the European Union that delayed for years the extradition of Abu Hamza, almost stopped the deportation of Abu Qatada, and tried to tell Parliament that however we voted, we could not deprive the prisoners of the vote. It was the European Convention on Human Rights. The ECHR can bind the hands of Parliament, adds nothing to our prosperity, makes us less secure by preventing the deportation of dangerous foreign nationals, and does nothing to change the attitudes of governments like Russia's when it comes to human rights. So regardless of the EU referendum, my view is this: if we want to reform human rights laws in this country, it isn't the EU we should leave, but the ECHR and the jurisdiction of its court.
The Equality Act 2010 inscribes radical social justice flim-flam into UK law. It quite simply denotes the abolition of a meritocratic Britain that champions civil unity above senseless division. Each time the BBC offers BAME-only internships, every diversity target applied to public and private companies, whenever you encounter so-called positive discrimination, it all stems from this statute. The Equality Act makes identity politics legal. And any government with a conservative bone in its body, or a truly liberal one for that matter, would see it repealed and confined to the dustbin of history. After listing what are described as protected characteristics, including age, race, sexual orientation, right, but not height, for some reason, hair colour, income bracket, or a number of others I could just arbitrarily conjure, Section 13 makes it a crime to discriminate against any person on the basis of the aforementioned. But Sections 158 and 159 provide deliberate loopholes. For example, a recruiter may discriminate if they reasonably believe, whatever that means, that persons who share a protected characteristic suffer a disadvantage connected to the characteristic, or participation in an activity by persons who share a protected characteristic is disproportionately low. These rules apply in terms of promotion also, and at no point are words like reasonable or disproportionately low defined anywhere. If Boris were to repeal these two sections alone, he would legally invalidate all positive action initiatives and open the floodgates to lawsuits on the grounds of discrimination. Do away with the Act entirely, and we could finally begin to steer HMS Britain in the right direction. We could become a country that truly judged people as individuals, where talent is the sole signifier of success, and where HR departments have no use for rabid social engineers hell-bent on sacrificing justice for social justice and productivity for politics. The Equality Act is the worst thing Tony Blair ever did. And you have ample opportunity now to undo his revolutionary agenda and set things straight. What are you waiting for?
Can you explain, actually, Peter? I mean, a lot of people hear about things like the Equality Act, and they don't really know what it was. What was it just? How did it set up the situation?
Well, let me give a simple example of one which is very telling. I mean, people think this is a Christian country by law and nature, and for many centuries it was. And if you look, as I advise people to do if they're trying to get to the grips of what the British Constitution really is, at the coronation service itself, clearly a profoundly and explicitly Protestant Christian ceremony, which declares the nature of this country and what sort of country it's like. So if you then get an Act of Parliament which says that basically all religions are equal, now you may say that you find that an attractive idea if you don't yourself either adhere to Christianity or you don't adhere to any religion at all, or you adhere to another one. You say, well, good. Why shouldn't all religions be equal? That's a point of view. I don't happen to share it, but it's a point of view I can quite understand people holding. But if you do that, while proclaiming that what you're doing is creating equality between religions, you are actively dethroning Christianity as the principle. And that's an example of it. And there are these protected characteristics. Now again, you say, well, of course I hate discrimination against women and I hate racial discrimination, and frankly, who doesn't? But the protected characteristics go much further than just disapproving of the hatred and discrimination against the people who are named. They actually give those protected characteristics a special status, which means that anybody who can be deemed to have attacked them, not by your standards of mine, they may not have done so. Anybody who can be deemed to have attacked or threatened them is thereby in danger of losing his or her job or in some other way being punished. It's the basis of a whole new idea of what is good and what is bad and what is wrong and what is right. Set beside it the Macpherson report into the Stephen Lawrence murder with this extraordinary declaration. So it actually comes out specifically against colourblind policing. And it says that that a racialist incident is anything which anybody believes to be one. And you have a subjective form of justice written into the Constitution. The consequences of these changes are huge and spread out over everything into the way people can and do behave. And they're vast. People didn't notice them at the time.
Right, you can't say fairer than that. I mean, I've given him 7 straightforward Tory policies that'll make a positive difference to the country. It's not an exhaustive list by any means. I mean, we didn't even discuss foreign policy, but that's more than enough for Boris to be getting on with for the next 6 months. Let me know what you would prescribe for Britain in the comments below. But can we all just agree here that I should be the next Dominic Cummings? Actually, screw that. Make me king already. These ideas are dynamite. Okay? They're what the British people need to be healthy, happy, and prosperous. So, will Boris do any of them? Of course he fucking won't.
Saruman, your staff is broken.